This is The Window, where we offer an insight into people's lives. Episode 2. I'm Zach Riven, and with us today is Coach Kevin Anglin. Thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks, Zach.
Coach, remind me how long you've been at MBA?
This is my 21st year.
I bet a lot has happened during that time. Let's get right into it. What was your first experience with basketball?
Probably playing in my driveway as a kid. Back in those days, we, most of the leagues didn't start until you were about 8 or 9 years old. So nowadays you can play kindergarten. We have kindergartners in our core hoops league playing, and back then it was really 8. So I spent probably the first several years just in my driveway. My dad, working on layups and all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
And then obviously you continued to play throughout middle school, high school. And then when it came time to decide where you'd be playing after high school, was that a hard decision when you committed to Vanderbilt?
Well, committing to Vanderbilt wasn't a hard decision because that's where I wanted to go all along. But that process is a challenging one. Most people I think that it's a really glorious process to be recruited, at a Division I level. And there is a side to it that where that's true. But it's also it's a stressful time. There's a lot of factors at play. Your future is kind of uncertain, and so so it's a challenging process. I'm glad I don't have to go through it again.
Yes, sir. Were there other places where you looked?
Yeah, I talked to lots of different schools throughout that process. I probably messed up a little bit in that process. My parents and I had never been through that and probably didn't handle it as well as we could have. I probably limited myself because I wanted to go to Vanderbilt. They had showed early interest in me, and so I kind of made the mistake of thinking that was probably a foregone conclusion, and it ended up working out. But there was a moment there the summer before my senior year in high school when it looked like maybe that wouldn't work out, and I hadn't done some of the other camps and all-star games and that sort of thing, and I had told some other people no in the process. For example, I got a call from Stanford one night in the summer, wanting to kind of start the recruitment process, and I just kind of told them I wasn't really interested. At the end of the day, the place I probably would have gone had I not gone to Vanderbilt was to Evansville, University of Evansville, which had a coach at the time, was a guy named Jim Cruz, who was kind of a Bobby Knight disciple, and they were really good at the time. They were a perennial NCAA tournament team, so that's probably where I would have ended up.
Quick little question here. When you were playing at Vanderbilt, where was the hardest place to play an away game?
Probably Rupp in Kentucky, just because they're I don't know that it was the arena so much, but they just played extremely well at home, and it was one of the few places we never won in my 4 years.
And then how did you get from playing college basketball to now head coach at MBA, and did you know that was something that you wanted to do when you grew up coaching high school?
Yeah, I think I don't know as a kid that I necessarily thought about, when you're playing as a kid, it's just all about being able to play, and, you hope to play as long as you can. I think, as I got later in my collegiate career, it was something that maybe got into my mind a little bit. And when I graduated from Vanderbilt, the coach who had coached me, a guy named Eddie Fogler, actually left kind of immediately after my senior year and went to South Carolina. And so there was a coaching change. And so I was able to get involved in being on the next staff at Vanderbilt for a year. And rather than sort of bounce around and try to play professionally in Mexico or Uzbekistan or wherever I might have been able to play, that seemed like a logical thing to do. So that's kind of where it started.
What was the transition like from player to coach?
It's a challenging one because how you view the game as a player is very different than how you view it as a coach, and the skill sets required to be good at one are not necessarily the skill sets required to be good at the other. In fact, I think it's why you see that. And there are certainly exceptions to this rule, but I think as a general rule, a lot of the great players haven't always really been great coaches. The fact that they could do it as a player is different than helping other people figure out how to do it. So it's challenge. It's a challenge. I'd like to think we've learned over the years, and made that transition. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge. They're not the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. Would you say it helped being a guard type player, going from that to coach rather than let's say like a center?
Yeah, probably. And I think when I was playing in the SEC back in the day, I don't think I would have been. I had a really productive career, and I think I was considered a good player, but I was not probably considered your prototypical SEC athlete. And so I had to be successful in other ways, toughness and intelligence and, being prepared and those kinds of things. And I think that was very helpful in the transition into coaching.
Yes, sir. What's been your biggest mistake coaching basketball, whether that's at MBA or wherever else you've coached? And then how did that help you grow?
Yeah, I think, probably the biggest challenge in coaching and the place you think you make mistakes the most often. I mean, you worry about making mistakes in decisions around who you keep on teams and not, because that's not an exact science. You worry about, did you handle a team or a player correctly? Maybe you should have been more positive with this guy, or maybe you should have pushed this guy harder, or those kinds of things. So I don't know that it's one thing, but I think those are the areas where I probably end up having more regrets than not.
For sure. What do you look for in an assistant coach?
Well, you want your assistant coaches to be intelligent around the game. You want them to be supportive and on the same page with you in terms of where you're trying to take a team and a program. And I think probably the biggest thing is you look for people that you can trust. Obviously the knowledge is important and those sorts of things, but people that you can trust and trust that they're going where you're going, I think is really important.
And then how do you get your players to become a team? So whether that's during the season or beginning of the season during the summer.
Yeah, well, that's the challenge, isn't it? There's an old kind of coach's saying that people use a lot, saying, I shouldn't have to coach effort and unselfishness. And in some utopian world, that's probably true, or you wouldn't have to coach those things. But the reality is, those are probably the two biggest things that you better coach. You have to find a way to demand effort from your teams, and you have to find a way to demand that they play together. And I don't know that there's any one particular thing that we do, but it is a part of our culture that we hammer all the time. That this is bigger than you. That we make the extra pass, that we share the ball, that individual achievement, really comes through team success, those kinds of things. And so, it took us a while, I think, probably over the first 4 or 5 years we were here to sort of ingrain that culture, which was built through lots of little daily actions. And I think we've got that culture now, and I think it's now, when you have a good program is when players are handing that culture to the next group of players. And I feel like we're in a pretty good place on that.
Yes, sir. What was the biggest surprise that came when you first started coaching at MBA?
We weren't as talented as I thought we might be or could be. Yeah, when I first got here, we were the team had been pretty successful, but the year before I got here, it had won 5 games, and it had kind of really dropped off, and some of the better athletes on campus weren't playing basketball anymore. And when I took the job, I thought, well, we may not be the most athletic team, but we'll shoot it well, and we'll do these other. And we didn't really do anything very well when I first got here, and so it's kind of the analogy I use a lot is it's sort of like a house. You can knock a house down in a day, and it takes you months and months to build one. And that was kind of like what those. I feel like it got knocked down right before we got here, and it took us really. I think we won the state championship our 7th year. So it took us several years to really kind of get it going.
Tell me about the 3 most influential people in your life and how they impacted you.
So I think I would probably start with my parents. They have impacted me in all of the ways that parents impact you, from an early age. My dad, the values of hard work and, when you say something, mean it. And when you give your word, you keep it and, and those kinds of things. It's not about you. And, you just kind of quietly go about your job and do what you're supposed to do and hold up your end of the bargain. My mom, on the spiritual side and, innumerable ways. My high school coach was an influence on me for sure, as was my college coach. So those are probably people I would put beyond my parents.
Did you have any siblings?
I have 2 sisters, both younger. One's just a little bit younger. The other's like 13 years younger than me.
Oh, wow. Do they play any sports?
They, the middle sister played a little bit of basketball, but it really wasn't her she didn't love it. And the other one really was more of a cheerleader type.
Describe your ideals for NBA basketball.
Well, I mean, you know this because you've sat in some of those meetings, but, we use our culture is sort of wrapped up in the 5 things that we say all the time, right? Play hard, play smart, play together, play with class, play to win. And some of that's been borrowed. I grew up in college playing in basically the Carolina system, and a lot of people thought of Dean Smith and Carolina as the X's and O's of that system, and there is some of that that certainly is ingrained in that, and there's probably still some of that you can see in the things that we do at MBA, but really it was about play hard, play smart, play together, and we've kind of added the last 2 over the years about playing with class, conducting yourself the way that we want to, and then playing to win. That, hey, when we're out there, winning is not the end-all, be-all, everything, but if you're going to play, kind of like, that famous Herm Edwards line, you play to win the game. And so those are the 5 things that if you ask any of our players, what is NBA basketball about, I would hope whatever they could remember of those 5 things would come out of their mouth.
Yes, sir. And this kind of ties back to the last question, but what would you say your distinct coaching style is?
I would hope that that people would see us as very organized, very prepared, teams that are sound, fundamentally in what we're doing, teams that play well together. I try to be demanding of our players, but also try to be, human with our players. I hope they know that we care about them beyond, just what we're doing on the court, although, we're going to be demanding of what we expect of them on the court. I don't know if that's the reality of it all of the time, but I certainly hope that that's what we're aspiring to be.
For sure. If you had to give advice to future coaches, what would it be? And then what's been the best advice you've received?
Yeah, I think that probably the first thing that I would tell anybody who's starting out in coaching is that you have to be yourself. It's really easy to want to mimic your mentors and to do things exactly the way they've done it. And there's a lot to learn from mentors. But if you're not yourself, your players will know it. If you're trying to be somebody else or something you're not, it can come across as a little disingenuous, or like you don't really have this thing mastered yet. So I think that's the first thing I would tell people is you gotta be prepared, you gotta be knowledgeable, learn from your mentors, but be yourself. And if you look across coaching, there are all sorts of coaches that are successful. There's the yellers and screamers are successful. There's the guys who sit there and never say anything who are successful. There's players, quote unquote, players coaches that are successful. There's, the old, iron horse guys. A lot of them are successful. So you can do it a lot of different ways. There are guys who fail who try to do it in all those ways as well. But you got to be yourself. And so that's probably the biggest thing I would tell people.
What about the best advice you've received?
Probably along those same lines. Going back to something I mentioned earlier, which was the idea that you better coach attitude and effort. You can't leave that to the players because it's not. We talk to our players a lot. We do these emphasis of the day, both offensively and defensively, and then just sort of a general life emphasis of the day. And one of them we talk about is that it's not human nature to want to work hard, and it's not really human nature to be unselfish. And so those are daily choices that you have to make. And so coaching those things is important, and it's also extremely challenging. Some groups are really responsive to what you want to do, and other years you feel like you're trying to squeeze water out of a rock, trying to get the kind of effort and unselfishness you want out of them. And it's not an exact science. It's an art, and I think any coach would tell you there have been some years they feel like they've done a great job, and other years where they feel like they just didn't feel like they pushed the right buttons. And that's both the really satisfying part when you get that right, and it's also the really frustrating part when you can't seem to get it right.
How has coaching high school basketball, or just high school basketball in general, changed in the past 20 years?
It's changed in a lot of ways. I think, first of all, the game has changed just in terms of the way the game is played. And so if you're not willing to sort of adapt and change over time, it's easy to get left behind. I think the players in some ways individually are more skilled. Every generation I think gets a little bit bigger and faster and a little bit more athletic, and so I think it's changed in that sense. I think one of the biggest ways it's changed in the last probably 10 years is And I think you could really point to Steph Curry is the love of not just shooting the ball from the three-point line, but shooting the ball 5 feet behind the three-point line. More and more kids, have tried to emulate him and some of the guys in the NBA and have gotten pretty good at it. And so where you have to guard people on the floor is different than it used to be. You used to guard the three-point line at the three-point line. Now there are guys who are a threat 5 feet behind the three-point line, and that's changed the way you approach the game. The culture around the game has changed. I don't think we run into this as much here at MBA, but I think out in the world you would see players who consider their AAU teams to be their season and not so much their high school teams. NIL, a lot of the issues you see, happening in the college game are, eventually trickle down to the high school game. And so it's changed a lot. In some cases, maybe for the better. In some cases, I would argue not for the better. But I know if you don't adapt and, figure out ways to handle things, eventually your success will dry up.
You think a 4-point line is on its way?
That would be an interesting change. I don't. It wouldn't surprise me if that gets considered. I think it would surprise me a little bit if that got implemented, but at least at the high school level anytime soon. We can't, for example, in Tennessee, we don't have a shot clock, and that it comes up every couple of years, but it most recently it's been tabled again. I think there's a lot of people who still like the purity of the high school game, and there are logistical issues around that as well. So I'd be surprised if we see that anytime soon at the high school level, although in the NBA, who knows, wouldn't surprise me.
Going back to the shot clock, would you say not having a shot clock hurts more than it helps high school basketball, or opposite?
To be honest with you, I don't think it really affects the game all that much. People point to occasional games where a team has held the ball and it's really low scoring, but the truth is that doesn't happen very often. And I think if you found most high school coaches, I would be in favor of a shot clock, but I think that the mistake people make is they always think shortening the shot clock makes the game better. Let's have a 35, let's have a 30, let's have a 24-second shot clock. And the thing they forget to consider in that is it's easier to play defense. Right? It's easier to circle the wagons and make you prevent you from getting a good shot in a short amount of time. And so while you create a lot of extra possessions in the game,
it's rushing things,
and you create a lot of ugly possessions. And the scoring doesn't really change, but the aesthetics of the game change quite a bit. So while I would be in favor of maybe a 35 to a 45-second shot clock that sort of keeps people from just holding the ball forever, but also is enough time where it allows them to be what they want to be offensively. If you want to play fast, play fast. If you want to be a little more methodical, you can do that. And the other thing is, if you want to play fast, you have to do something to play fast. You have to go press. You have to go trap. You have to do something instead of just, the shot clock is pressing for me, so let's just do things to make them waste time and push them up against the shot clock. And I think that's what you see a lot of. And one of the things I don't think, particularly at the college level, that you see as much of as we used to is variety in style of play. Because there's no reason to do, how many teams really press at the collegiate level? There's some, but not as many as there used to be because the shot clock is pressing for them. So it's changed the strategy. And so I'm okay with the shot clock, but I think the shorter shot clock actually hurts the game instead of just sort of preventing, people from holding the ball forever.
That's an interesting perspective on that.
Yeah.
All right, and then our final 2 questions here. Second to last one, your top 5 basketball players ever in the world.
Your
starting 5.
The arguing, the list you can argue over forever, and nobody can ever answer. I can only answer with guys that I've seen in my lifetime that I really appreciated as players. Jordan you have to put on that list. I would put Magic Johnson on that list. I would put Larry Bird on that list. I think, it'd be hard not to put LeBron on that list. Gosh, you could make arguments for lots of people to be on that list. Kareem, Hakeem Olajuwon, on and on and on. Kevin McHale was a great player for the Celtics back in the day. Steph Curry, you could make a case, even though he's more recent, you could make a case as on a track where he would be on that. So I don't know, just spitballing here, those would be some of the names that would pop into my head.
Yes, sir. What are your thoughts on Wemby? You think he'll have a successful career?
I think so. I think we live in a world where nobody's interested in the process. Everybody just wants to go right to the results, right? And you don't go from being a 19-year-old, non-NBA player to being the best player in the league, in 2 weeks, right? It's a process, and it was I mentioned Jordan a minute ago, and I know a lot of people in your generation have probably watched The Last Dance and stuff, but a lot of people don't remember that. He toiled for 5 or 6 or 7 years in the league trying to get over the hump with his team to win a championship, and they finally did. But it was a process to get there, and so I think he's got phenomenal tools. Just the physical tools themselves, the length and the skill is you can't coach that kind of stuff, and so I do think he'll be a really great player, assuming he stays healthy. But it's going to be a process to get there.
I agree. And then our last question here: how do you define greatness?
I think my appreciation and things that I think are great have to do, from my perspective, and as it relates to basketball, have to do with guys who have worked their way into being great. And I'll give you an example, and this is not a knock on these guys at all, but I played in an era when Shaq was, he was at LSU when I was playing at Vanderbilt, and he was a phenomenal player. He would be considered one of the best centers of all time. But if you ask yourself, why is that the case? A lot of that has to do with just God-given, he was 7'1", 280 pounds and agile, right? And not necessarily with the fact that he had cultivated this great skill set through hour upon hour upon hour in the gym. And so I tend to gravitate toward guys who've had to work their way into being great, and they're great because of this skill set that's been cultivated, maybe not as much just because they were just born that way, although Shaq was great, but I think it was more he was born that way. And he worked hard, don't get me wrong, but you take a guy like, Steph, who's got this skill set that he's had to cultivate over time, or, some other guys. And so I tend to associate greatness with a skill set, or an ability that's been achieved through a lot of work, as opposed to just kind of being naturally that way. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again for doing this. I look forward to listening back through this.
Yeah. Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it.